Hi, welcome. Welcome to the SIAT Graduate Research Colloquium Spring Speaker Series. My name is Kate Hennessy. I'm a professor here at the School of Interactive Arts and Technology at SFU, and I'm happy to be working with graduate students in our program to bring speakers to all of us. I first want to acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional Coast Salish territories of the Katzie, Kwantlen, Coquitlam, Kikite, Tsawwassen, and numerous Stolo nations here on the Surrey campus of Simon Fraser University. Um, and we're all very happy to be able to be here to think critically, to engage with new technologies and the worlds that we all inhabit together. I'm really happy to welcome one of our first speakers this year, Professor Philippe Pasquier. But before we get started, I'm going to invite graduate student Dhruv Adia to introduce Dr. Pasquier, and then we will begin the talk. So Dhruv, welcome.
Right. Hello, hello. Um, Hello, dear friends. This is an absolute honor and pleasure to introduce Philippe. I am part of the lab at Meta Creations lab. And I wanted to give a little bit of even a personal introduction. Many of you would have heard that, the work that Philippe does, and you'll see a lot of that today. At the building co-creative tools, and at the forefront of building agentic systems within sound, but you are actually about to visit our lab today, you will find a lot of other interesting facets to the lab and the work that Philippe does at the forefront of agentic systems. You'll see him mentioning something like ChatGPT kind of systems done about 10 years ago. um, and personally, I have to say that we are pushing the boundaries when it comes to bioadaptive feedback systems, and how AI and agentic systems need to evolve when it comes to understanding human beings and not just bring information. So, uh, you know, uh, I would like to say that the Meta Creation Lab is much more than what you would have perceived, and the work that Philippe does in terms of sound. Creating, whether it's about creating co-creative tools, agentic creative tools, or bioadaptive feedback systems, obviously sound related systems. And I'm sure you'll hear more about that from Philippe. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Philippe.
I think I have my own.
Oh yeah.
I have my own mic,
Right, right, right.
and it's interesting that Drew got to introduce me. Thank you, Kate, for the invitation as well, because I met Drew as a entrepreneur. Still is uh, 10 plus years ago in a project we were leading with Tekla Schifforts then, and it's a testimony to the quality of our program that 10 years later he decided to join us as a PhD student this time, and so there is really here a good reputation, a good impact we must have made on you so that you're back to us now. All right, so today what I'm going to do is go through a little bit in the next 45 minutes, a little bit of a narrative that will both be my way to introduce to you what we do in the lab, and at the same time to comment a little bit on the rather agitated news, not the environmental news, which are agitated, not the geopolitical news, which are definitely agitated, but the news regarding the relentless rise of AI, especially generative AI, which is really our specialty. And when I talk about AI today, I'm not talking about general artificial intelligence that would take over the world and be better than humans at every type of cognitive task that humans do. I'm going to talk about what's already in place, which is a multitude of narrow systems that automate tasks that before the rise of computers were tasks that only a human brain can process. And in that sense, AI is sort of this moving front of automating cognitive tasks. If you think about it, a six-figure multiplication, which doesn't sound like AI, only you and a computer can do that operation. And then we get to automate increasingly complex tasks. In the 80s, we automated playing chess. In the 90s, we automated finding the shortest path on a digital map. And now we're automating human conversations. And we have narrow AI that can't do all of the tasks that humans do, that won't start swimming if you throw them into the water. but that win the Olympiad of mathematics and some of the most complex challenges that humans have designed for humans and to challenge themselves. So we live in a critical time of the rise. At the Meta Creation Lab since 2008, we've been looking at studying this idea of the partial or complete automation of cognitive tasks, but focusing on creative tasks, those that are computer mediated at least. And so we develop for that generative algorithm, and we do that across domains. We've built systems that generate choreography, movement, that generate video game levels, that generate visuals, that generate music and sound. To see a little bit if the creative process simulated at least would be similar between those different domains. And the difference between the work we do and the rest of AI and computer science in general is in computer science, often we're interested in optimal solution to a problem. That's a methodology called rational problem solving. And very early on, I found that creative tasks were interesting because they don't abide by this notion that there is an optimal solution. Creative tasks are all those tasks for which there's no Pareto dominant solution, no utility function, no such thing as the shortest path in the Google Maps sort of idea where, there is the best path for you to route through the city to get where you want. When you dress in the morning, there's no such an optimal set of clothes to choose from. When you make a joke, when you write a poem, when you make a drawing, music, interpretation, and composition, etc. So we're interested to see, can we automate those tasks, and how do we do so? And in doing so, we take an interdisciplinary approach, which is not atypical here at SIAT, where we do the science. So we really do publish algorithm and new mathematical developments for the automation of those tasks. Then we applied, when it works, we applied with the industry and try to design interfaces and think about how are we going to give to creators those tools. And then we practice and we design and we make art both ourselves as a first person practice to get to test the algorithm we put forward and the tools we put forward, but also in collaboration. And I'll talk about that with other artists to get a second person point of view on the work we do. And we like to have those artists embedded into the research process from the get-go, because we do believe in this idea of participatory design, the idea that you can't really design something well if the people you intend to design for are not part of the work. And so today I'm gonna present to you what I think is and will be the two main families of approach of applications of generative systems. And I'll give you examples of what we do in the lab in these two families. Then we'll talk a little bit about the evaluation and some studies we did with creators and their audiences regarding the use of those tools and their acceptability. And then we'll talk about challenges and opportunities to finish with. So the first family of approaches I want to discuss with you today is this idea of embedded real-time generation, which is embedded in AI historically through the notion of artificial agent. And in the lab, we had quite a bit of success working on the notion of musical agents. And musical agents, before anything else, they are artificial agents. And artificial agents is the main notion of modern AI since the 80s, roughly. And it's simply this idea that we can design computer systems that perceive the world around them, often a software world, maybe online, and act on that world by acting. And when we say that they can perceive and act, we mean that they're not just reactive. They're not like you push a button in Word and something happens. They don't just react to command. They eventually are proactive. They can form their own goals and sequence through planning sequences of action they want to achieve in the world to achieve those goals. And then they can revise those goals based on what they perceived through their perception. And so this notion of agent is now really popular because it's been popular for a long time in video games. The idea of non-player character is typically a virtual agent, an artificial agent. But then in 2022, ChatGPT came, and now everyone is used to interact with those agents. Much more recently, CloudBot. Who knows CloudBot here? Oh, CloudBot came about, which is extremely powerful agents. You can instruct it to do all sorts of things. It's so powerful that it's recommended not to install it on your own computer because it might
wipe clean your hard drive, because it's like any AI at the moment, not as reliable as it is powerful. And so there's been really a rise of artificial agents, and everyone is familiar with that. So for ourselves, we've been working on musical agents for quite a long time. We've been proposing surveys of the field, and it's surprising that there's all sorts of musical agents. This is a list of architectures that are available out there. And there's been all sorts of research and practice around this notion of musical agents, which comes down to an agent that can listen to music in real time and play along with a musician, whether it's another artificial agent or a live musician. In particular, the architecture we've been working on is pretty simple, and if you think about it, it works exactly like a lot of human musicians. It's listening to a lot of music, it's remembering and building a vocabulary of sounds, and it's learning how to imitate the music it's been listening to. And so, for example, it will be able to ask itself questions such as, given what Philippe just played and what I just played, what would I play next if I was that composer or if I was that musician? And then it just generates one of the possible continuations. Here is an example of such a musical agent trained on the music of our good friend Mehmet from the audiophile group in Istanbul. And that was at Ars Electronica in 2017. Here you hear the agents playing and generating music on its own, and it's interacting with the visual system. So you see the video is quite tightly synced. All right, that gives you an idea of what those agents can do. But there's no point having them playing alone, because I could have recorded the agent and then played that to the audience. It really just makes sense when you interact in real time with them, which is what we did a number of times for MUTEC, and very recently, always with SIAT students and graduate students being involved, very recently at the AV performance last August in 2025. That was the last performance. And so this is really my way for you to introduce different types of agents, because everyone knows ChatGPT, people don't know musical agents very well. And a good example of this one concept of co-creation, this idea that the AI and you are co-creating work. And co-creation in that this is not computer-assisted creativity, which we're going to talk about next, where you go back and forth and you're in the creator's seat. Here, I play along with the agent. If the agent starts playing things that I really don't like, too bad. We're on stage in front of an audience. You know, there is no rewinding and generating again. So co-creation, there is this aspect that the input of the system is part of the final output, and is its authorship, quote unquote, and we'll talk about that, is respected in the final output. So we've been having a practice of playing with those agents for over a decade now. At SFU, Arne Engelfeld is well known for also working with musical agents. Lastly, we keep on developing those agents, and as the technology evolves, we're able to add capabilities, diversify the type of behaviors the agent can have. Maybe I want an agent that leads or that follows me, or maybe an agent that is more complementary and try to complement what I do. And then I want, when I rehearse, to be able to tell the agent, say, that was good, let's do more of that, and that was not super, let's not do that anymore, through reinforcement learning. So that's an example of real-time system that has to generate the right content in real time, this idea of musical agents. Another type of system we've been working on, this time with Omid Alemi when he was doing his PhD at SIAT, is movement generation. If you run a video game and you have, like World of Warcraft, 12 million players playing 20 hours per week, how many actors do you need to motion capture so that all the characters in the game have their own movement signature? Well, way too many is the answer. And so instead, what we do is we mock up a number of performers that are very distinct, and we build a model with a latent space that allows to generate movement styles that are interpolation of the existing one or extrapolations of the existing one that are by definition movement signatures that do not exist, but that looks extremely realistic. And we can move here between performer style, if you wish, and then we can control all sorts of properties of the movement and generate in real time those movements instead of playing a motion capture file. Here we have one of those agents dancing on generative music, just one of the first research on multimodal generation. Oh, and we lost the music. Okay, interesting. Let's move on then. All right, so that's a third agent, movement generation, another example of real-time generation. And one could ask, but why do you want those real-time generation, or in general, those generative systems? And I started to give you an answer with my example with video game. There is indeed a move. It's not a move as in we're going to stop reading books and make CDs or pieces of music or films, but there's a lot more interactive media than linear media at the moment. In fact, video game is bigger than film plus television, and it's been a while right now. And when you put together interactive media, there's quickly an exponential explosion of the number of assets you need, like for the example of the motion capture and the animation in a video game. And so more and more, there's a pragmatic need for those generative systems. And I have to say also an economical need, because generating all those assets manually is very, very costly. And the big video game production are now tenfold the cost of big film productions, and it becomes unsustainable. So there's more and more generative system need there. But I think the more interesting justification for generative systems is this idea, which is both a promise and becoming a reality increasingly so, of having systems that do generate the right content at the right time for the right user. And that's this idea of adaptive experience. In cognitive psychology, one of the main concepts is that of flow, which for every interactive experience, whether it's a conversation, whether it's teaching a course or playing a video game, if it is too easy, this video game, or what the professor says you already know, you're gonna lose attention. You're gonna be bored and you're gonna disengage. If this video game is way too hard, you can't move forward, you keep on losing, it's not fun, you're gonna be discouraged and you're gonna disengage. In other words, when you're learning, when you're playing, when you're interacting, there is, and when you're playing music with others, there is this zone that we call the flow zone. And that flow zone, believe it or not, they change over time. Some people are fast learners. You need to challenge them increasingly quickly. Some people are slow learners. And then it changes dynamically. Sometimes you plateau, sometimes you stop learning for a while, and then you go again. In other words, the best way to manage interactions in general, and it's true in our conversations too, is to adapt the content to the situation in real time. If you were a prince, a princess, or a sultan, you would have your own professor. You would not sit in a room full of other people, because personalized education works better than education in which we get to choose if we teach for the best students, the worst students, the average students. We have to make social political decisions. And we are capable, to finish that little part of the story right now, with AI to capture where is your flow zone and how it evolves through time, so as to deliver and generate the right content at the right time for the right experience, like an individual professor, educator, storyteller would do. And this is not just a set of concepts. When we test that by participating in video game competition, so we compete against human designers to design the best video game levels, we do show that if we track the flow zone of the player and we generate, I won't go into the details, but we generate rhythm pattern within those flow, and we make it move according to the player. And we also do that for the generation of the music, so that if the player is winning, we have a cheerful, encouraging, happy music, and if he's about to lose, not so much. And we show indeed that if we do that, then the players play more, and they're more immersed, they enjoy more, and the emotional responses are bigger. So that's just in the case of game, to show that those concepts can be applied. But of course, in education and in health, there's a lot of opportunities there as well. And that's the second concept of moving from just generating content to functional generation, generating content for a reason. For example, alumni from SIAT, Nicola Gonzalez and James Maxwell, started this company in which they generate soundscape. There's a strong tradition of soundscape composition at SFU. They generate soundscape according to the goal you have. You want to sleep or you want to focus to work, then different signal will potentially have different effect. And this is exactly the idea that with Dhruv here and his company who is working on breath work. We're trying as well to use ear biofeedback to inform how the system will adapt what it generates to fit and to achieve results for you. In the case of soundscape generation, you can almost see that as a partial mini automation, not that we can compete, of music therapy. We know music therapy works. The only reason you don't have a music therapist, and you probably self-medicate your own music when you need to, is economical, really. And there's 8 billion humans. We can't train a billion music therapists. And so there's opportunities there for AI to be useful in generative system, to be useful. The last example I will take is in the case of doing that for doing patient retention and for people who have type 2 diabetes, and try to keep them on course with their treatment and their intervention through the introduction of interactive virtual agents that would follow up with them and talk to them like a nurse or a doctor would, except much more frequently and at way cheaper cost.
Most health systems are beautifully designed to service acute events. North American taxpayers spend trillions for hospitals and clinics that are ready to help when life is seriously threatened. However, if you find yourself with a chronic condition, you're largely on your own until you have a crisis. The terrible twist is that chronic disease contributes to 90% of health expenditures in the USA. Humanity needs a new approach to chronic disease that gives patients, their peers, their loved ones, and their care teams a better way to fight back. That's why Quick Healthcare is introducing the Quest Loop. You begin by creating a picture of a future that inspires you. The Quest Loop gives you a system for realizing your vision, putting you and your data at the center. You can then integrate feeds from your devices and wearables, along with other health apps that you love. The Quest Companion will help you prevail over the day, the month, and the year. Your loop is supercharged when your care team and loved ones join with their own views of your progress and challenges, so they can support you on your journey. What makes the Quick Quest Loop special? It's a novel experience infused with the power of storytelling, featuring a growing cast of rich and engaging characters that add adventure to your journey. Hi, I'm Ronnie, a care conductor here at Quick. I'm here to help you enter your loop and get you started on your quest. If you're curious, just give us a whirl, starting with me, today.
Yeah, and if you go on the website, you can actually start an audio conversation with that particular agent and onboard the system. Another example of that is work we do with, again, SIAT alumni Alex Kitson and Mirna Papra. Here, this is about using some of those agents in a creative mode with narrative and social engagement as much as possible, help having those agents work in that case in chat VR to help humans reducing their foreign language speaking anxiety, which is a real problem for ESL and newcomers in Canada and elsewhere. And doing that in a virtual setting is much less threatening than doing that with other humans, as it turns out, and as we show. Yeah, and so it's working quite well, given how good those agents are at conversing with us, because one of the things they've been very human competitive at is to generate natural language content. So the picture that I'm drawing here is a move really that we move from AI being everywhere, the editor of what you consume, because when you Google something and AI decide which website you get to, when you Netflix, it tells you what to watch next. What if I would tell you what to listen to next, etc., etc., to a world in which we actually gonna not serve you human-made content and use AI to recommend you that content, but we're gonna use AI to generate that content at the right time for you. And I'm not saying that this is desirable. I'm saying this is a move we are observing ongoing. So that's really my conclusion here, where I stopped to talk about this first family of approaches of generating the right content at the right time, so online generation. The most common approach right now, the second family of application of those algorithms, is the one where you don't really care about real time so much. And that's where you more have a back and forth with the generative system. And so that's computer-assisted creativity when you do that for creative tasks. And it's nothing new, but it got really popularized really hard when text-based interfaces, prompt-based interfaces started appearing 2018, 2019, up to 2022, and later when ChatGPT appeared. And this idea is you get just to describe a content and it will generate the content for you. If you don't like it, you regenerate, and you hopefully have enough leverage to navigate the search space towards something that you're happy with. This is not new, as I was saying, and we were doing exactly that for sound design back in 2012. And that's where research is always about a decade ahead of the industry, even though the industry doesn't want you necessarily to think that way. And it's hard to compete with the PR machine of Google and Meta. They have thousands of people pushing their message. But it turns out at SIAT, we were making such system. Here it's prompting for sound design, and you get a full Pro Tools mix. And it retrieves the sound and puts them together. And so you describe the scene that you want. Maybe you want to hear kids playing in the forest, and then you describe the emotion that are supposed to be perceived. Maybe it's happy at the beginning, and maybe it's sad at the end, etc., etc. So if you ask the system to generate the soundscape of a waterfall in Thailand, it might sound like this. Etc., etc. And you can try it for yourself because the system is still online, audiometaphor.ca, and there's plenty of examples there. And we've been running an evaluation recently, and I'll talk about it at the end. So that was us in 2012, and there was no neural network involved actually. But then deep learning happened, and now you have systems that are prompt-based systems that are extremely powerful, like Udio or Suno. I was called to be a witness expert by the federal court in the US for the Udio versus Sony and Universal trial. The trial didn't happen, they settled under the ground. But this is a song, I didn't have time to make one for today, but it's easy enough. But now they did cut the download option, so it's a bit harder, but you can still go around it. This is the prompt I put into the system. A catchy electro song about me presenting creative AI at the Vinci Institute. It was a few months ago last year, and it sounds like this. Lights flash, the crowd's in sync, Philippe on the mic, hear that thing tank click, creative AIs, the vibe tonight, at the inside, the set to ignite. Etc. And if you don't like it, you can regenerate, of course, choose, change the lyrics, upload your own melody, download the stems. If here, just change a catchy R&B song, again with a female voice, same thing. If you have someone's birthday is coming, I strongly recommend it. But so it is brutal. So of course, Sony, Universal, not the artists themselves, although they're not happy, but the stakeholder of the artists are like, you can't do that. And right now, you can't download it anymore. And they were supposed to go to trial, and instead they found a deal. And they're like, oh, how about we generate more assets together that we can add to our catalog and sell to the world? And if you noticed, in fact, now a lot of those systems generate songs that are in the charts in the US, like literally in the top 40. In country music in particular. And if you're like, yeah, but I'm an experimental composer, I do contemporary music, you know, my aesthetic is special, it's not captured by those Hollywood-based models, those Californian for-profit companies, you'll be wrong, because this is electronic content, experimental content. Yeah, as long as you know how to describe it, it will do it for you. Now, interestingly, by law in Canada and in the US, prompting is not enough to give you copyright. So when you generate music with those systems, it's actually not your music. And then there's a debate, whose music is it then? So yeah, there's been those lawsuits, and now for the most part settled, which is really sad because that was the best gig of my life. But and I'm not sure they settled for the right reason. There's also an invasion of AI content. There was already 40,000 new songs every day produced by humans and uploaded on streaming, which is a lot. We're very creative as a group, but now there's about double that of AI production on top of it. And there's all sorts of pushback around the domination of the text box and this idea of prompting. And so how do you go further if prompting is not enough? Then we came up studying a little bit the landscape of computer-assisted composition, so music making, but not necessarily the making of the audio, in this case, the making of the scores. And we've been working for a while with Anne Engelfeld, another colleague here at SFU, on systems that generate scores. But as of recently, we came up with a new approach 5 years ago already, in 2020, yeah, 6 years ago, we're in 2026, a new deep learning approach based on the same algorithm that ChatGPT is made of, a GPT, and trained, as usual, that's how you make a difference, on the largest data set of sheet music. In that case, it's MIDI files released under fair use. As a researcher, we can scrap the internet and release that for research purposes, and we did. So the meta-creation library is that data set, and we were able to train through a number of nice new innovations in the underlying representation, train our own model. Some of those innovations very successful with hundreds of thousands of downloads really because the field is big. Train our own model under the principle of in-painting. So no prompt here because we don't really believe in text being a great interface to talk about music. If I could say with what I can do with sounds, I would stop doing it with sounds immediately as far as I'm concerned. So here we're interested in a system where you can't generate something from a prompt. What you need is to feed music, often your own music, to the system. And what you can do is do in-painting, where the system is going to resample some part of your music, add some tracks to your music, do a continuation of your music, etc., etc. So here is some of the examples of the system at work. And I really like the last variation. And so with those type of systems, and of course you can be unethical, like I just used copyrighted material that I started to remix here, and I can remix it to the point that you don't recognize it, and now it's mine. And so here I can add new tracks and be like, hey, add a marimba to this song. I can regenerate a track, like let's change the bass line or the melody because it's Stevie Wonder and everyone can recognize it. Or regenerate those bars because I like the rest. And so iteratively, you can eventually hone in onto something you like, not something you can make, but something you like. And this is the crux of the new world we live in of computer-assisted creativity, is you don't have to know how to make something, you just have to know what you want, how to describe it, or how to guide the system towards generating it. Of course, we can add all sorts of controls for musicians, note density, key, number of polyphony, or for non-musicians, high-level control, danceability, emotional attributes, etc., etc. It does, I'm going to pass on example here, it does work, and you sort of know as a researcher that it does work because all of a sudden, the industry is interested in your work way more than ever before. And then in this case, companies that make software for video game, like Elias in Sweden. In video games, there's a lot of transitions and a lot of repetition and variation needed. If you have a video game with 30, 40, 50 hours of play, for 50 hours of music is not a gig for a composer. It's not a humanly achievable thing. Like it takes a lifetime of the best artists on this planet to make 20 hours of music. And so, so what you want, if you have a composer making maybe 20 different loops that works really well for different parts of the game, then you have 20 by 20 possible transitions. While maybe the machine can compose those transitions and the composer can validate them and invalidate them. Right now with Paul here, we trained the latest model for MIDI generation that I'm talking about. We just got a MyTax a few weeks ago, actually, with a Montreal-based audio kinetic company, and they have the largest sound engine for video games called Wise, and that's what composers, professionals that make music and sound design for video game use, and they're interested in those systems for the reason I just described. Lots of people want to be musicians, they buy a synthesizer, but they don't really know how to play music nor compose it. Lots of people buy a software to make music. The aspirational purchase of, I'm buying the software, therefore I'll become a musician, turns out they don't. And so there's a way to lower the level of entry for a lot of creative tasks with those systems. And we did that for with collaboration with Teenage Engineering in Sweden for a line of the synthesizer. As I was saying, we use, I'm not going to play that now, but we use the systems ourselves to release music and albums and to make concerts. The concerts we did last year at Mutech was called Revival because we use our musical agents to revive dead composers on stage. I always wanted to play with David Tudor and John Cage, but they're dead. So, so digital afterlife applied to art and generation art. We did release as well free access to some of our tools in the form of plugins. And we have ongoing collaboration with some digital audio workstation makers like Steinberg. This is an example of the system remixing some Mozart, which is copyright free to start with because it's in the public domain, making new style of Mozart and making an arrangement that Mozart couldn't do because those instruments didn't exist when he was alive. So this is original. So we train those models, then we discard the data, then we can show the model doesn't replicate the data. There's no plagiarism really, very, very little. And we can weave it out. Then we can potentially sell those models. And that's the loophole that everyone has been using. But none of our system was sold ever. And I'll explain why in a second. All right, so you see here I was starting with a well-known piece from Mozart. You can generate a variation, make some arrangement. If you're a video producer for any animation for kids and you don't have, a massive budget to pay for a composer and musicians, those will become potential solutions for you. So as I was saying, so we work with all sorts of companies, and never it was sold, because there's in fact 3 types of companies now in the world. There's the big ones like the GAFA, who can afford losing in court and paying because it's not much for them. You have the companies that are AI companies like Suno and Udio. They have one product, it's AI or nothing. They take the risk and end up in court. And you have all the companies like the one I work with. They already have clients. Steinberg has 1 million licenses out there. There is no way they're going to release an AI tool on top of the 300 functionalities they already have and everyone is happy about, that could jeopardize their reputation, put them into legal shenanigans, etc. They need the legislation to be much, much more clear. And they're in a way suffering from not being big enough to absorb the cost and not having the legislation being clear. Okay, I'll pass here because I want to quickly run out of time on all the opportunities that those systems afford that are really new, like making 1,000 variations of your composition, ranking those variations according to certain criteria, and all sorts of new type of music making that were just not possible to imagine, and that we are studying and designing as we go. If you're interested in AI and music, there's an AI song contest, which is hilarious, but quite good. And we've been contributing ourselves with rock and roll and all sorts of things. We've even been on stage. Kion has been on stage. Some of our students have been on stage presenting work on TV in the Netherlands. And what's interesting with that contest is to realize when you give to artists those tools, how many tools are there and how many different ways there are to use them, from not using them at all, just for mastering, and the rest is human-made, to everything is AI-generated, and almost everything in between. Lyrics generation, cover of the album generation, drum generation, but the rest is human, voice generation, but the rest is human, etc., etc. We also work on other tasks, but my message here is the second family of approach, computer-assisted creativity, where there's this back and forth between a creator and a system. This is not just in music or sound design, like I demonstrated today. It is across all of the creative tasks. You name me a creative task that is computer-mediated, I know a system that does it. If there's none, you'll be rich. In fact, this is so true that we do believe now, I certainly do, that there's a real saturation of startups, company, and a real abuse of abusive amount of money that has been poured over the hopes and dreams of generative AI. And as often, we've been incapable of having any sort of democratic debate a priori around, do we want that type of systems in our societies? Where do we want them? For what? Etc. So the debating is just starting, but the companies and investors have moved ahead, which put everyone in a potentially complicated situation. I'm going to try to accelerate here because I'm running out of time, and we've been running extensive experiences about those systems. What does it mean for artists to use, maybe to have to use those systems now and in the future? When we do evaluation, we look at the real world, we work with artists, and we can see, if albums sell and if concert tickets sell, but there's also a bit of a fad for AI generation. But as I was saying, a lot of artists are now in the charts that are AI artists. We've been working with artists. We've been very privileged one-on-one a lot. We've been working with our systems as well. We've been funded by the Canadian Council for the Arts to release albums around those collaborations. And for the last 2 years, and it's been just confirmed that it's going to happen again in 2026, we've been hosting artistic residency in the Meta Creation Lab with the support of the Institut Français du Canada and of the CDM, in which we receive composers and we get to work with them on getting feedback on the current set of tools we're working on and on potential design of future tools. But what we're most interested in are more formal scientific studies. No, we're not most actually, but we're also interested in is doing quantitative studies, and often it has to show 2 things. Does it lower the barrier of entry for beginners? Does it make them learn faster and better? And does it save time and improve the efficiency of professionals who otherwise wouldn't need the systems to start with? And it turns out when you study with audio metaphor, for example, and you give people a sound design to do without the system and with the system, then you find that indeed novices get faster by using the system. The outcome is better, both subjectively they find it better, but if you grade, which we do in course, If you grade their assignments, they also do better there. But they still feel, even for novices who are really new at sound design, they still feel that in the case where they had to use the AI because it was mandatory for that assignment, they don't feel they had as much authorship on the results than before. And that raises the question, when you work with the system, what comes out? Is it your music? Or is it, great music, but that's the system music, and I was just, driving the system towards something I kind of like? Or is it a collaboration between you and the system? So we've been studying that, and we've been studying that with Renaud Cheme-Bouguin, who did graduate late last year, and with a professional who are using Steinberg. So they're using this digital audio workstation for their living. Like, this is how they earn their money, and so they care. Some of them, this software is one of the oldest. I'm out of time. This software is one of the oldest software available to make music, and some of them have been using it for 30 years. And all of a sudden you tell them, so now you have to use this AI within that software to make your music. So we didn't want to know just, does it work? Is it good? Are you more efficient? Essentially, is it your music? Do you feel it's your music? The authorship and the phenomenology of working with that system. Do you now go to work in the morning and you feel like you're going to vomit, or do you feel good about it? So rather longitudinal studies with a number of composition tasks across 6 weeks and all sorts of instruments around it. And I won't go through the results because we're running out of time, but the TLDR is that they don't have any problem with authorship, because we found out that those professionals, they kind of like using the system, and they use it to get some inspiration and be like, what if I would do this and that? What if I ask a marimba here? And then they, oh no, that's not cool, and they do generate a couple of times, and then they're like, oh, I like that, and then they're going to start writing the music, because in fact they're not going to use what the system does. Their reflex is just write those parts because they can. And so it was interesting for us to discover that it was not as bad as we could have anticipated. But when the case for 25 years, nobody can tell. Like, under Swiss. So to conclude here, I presented you those two families of systems: embedded generative system that have the potential to generate the right content at the right time for the right experience, and then computer-assisted creative system, which hold the promise of make professionals better and more efficient at what they do, and then potentially lower the barrier of entry for beginners. And finally, I have to say, maybe provide in general, those systems will provide different types of interfaces, and at SIAT we care about HCI, that might not be worse than the current sort of clicking station that people are working on, by which we show that most creative workers click on the same button in the same software in the same order over and over, and we can predict the next click at like 75% accuracy. Okay, can I have 10 more minutes, or am I done? I can be either. I know we started like, yes, I got a formal yes from Kate, thank you. The other issue that we tackled in the lab, which I think is important, is the one of the big data issue. This idea that a lot of companies, those big models, typically for-profit Californian companies, the data have been scrapped from the internet, and that means they've been sort of stolen and they're mostly copyrighted. And they argue like us, but we can do it by law in Canada as researchers under fair use, that they have the right to scrap the internet. And this is still being debated in court, although so far the AI company seems to start settling in differently and start losing some of those trials. But it's a real problem. Even Google is in trial right now. You know that Google now gives you this answer, AI answer at the top of your search, and that undercut their service, because you're supposed to click on those links. It's supposed to be a search engine. And then you can exploit that model, and you can hook up controllers and all sorts of things that allows you to simply navigate those otherwise rather big space to find those nuggets that you like inside those models using direct manipulation in this case. So we've been making artworks ourselves with these systems, and we've been collaborating with friends, colleagues, and artists to train some of those systems. You can make still images, moving images. And what's interesting is you indeed can make things that the big models can't make. So for example, as we published with Arshia Soban at SIGGRAPH 2 years ago, if you ask a big model to generate Arabic calligraphy, it's going to fake the Arabic characters, which is pretty offensive to that culture, both because those characters were faked themselves by the painters in the 19th century, a bias called Orientalism, and also because Arabic calligraphy is definitely underrepresented online. So if you want to generate that type of content, then you have to train your model. You have to go small data because it won't work otherwise. And then we derive artworks from those models that are a bit more contemporary and original. We've been presenting some of those works at Ars Electronica, and because the system is real time, you can use it in performance, and I've been using it myself touring when I was in China and in other places. We're giving workshop, and for those who are interested, we have online content available, and the next workshop will be UVic coming at the end of the month. Then we'll be in Pakistan, at Vivo, if they still exist, and in Thailand, etc., etc. So what I'm saying here is that there is actually quite a bit of tools that allows you to choose and move away from the big for-profit corporate world product, which basically only allow you to navigate existing models trained on existing scrap data. And you can take ownership of the data that the system is made of, and you can also craft your own model and iterate and make this model training a practice, a part of the practice, because the truth is the first model you train is never doing exactly what you want. And you learn that as you learn any other practice through iteration, and that's really becoming a practice in itself. And we like to position ourselves in that bottom right corner there. Okay, so I'm gonna conclude here by saying a few words about work replacement. All of those systems, they raise a lot of fears. And often this is just the mark that there's real innovation and change here, because each time we started automating things before the automation of cognitive tasks through digital means, we went through the Industrial Revolution and we automated physical work, and there was some serious pushback. Not just that machines were broken and workers unhappy, but there was philosophical, political, social movement that were really interesting in France with the silk workers as well, and in the creative industry as well. When the musicians were removed from theaters because the phonogram was allowing to play music, then the American Federation of Musicians bought some space in the journals of the time to denounce the debunkment of real artists being replaced by machine. And so those fears and those pushbacks are not new. Now the disruption is predicted to be big this time, but there's also, as always, some new jobs, new practice that emerge, and you can now have full degree in prompt engineering that did not exist a few years ago. So I'll really conclude this time by saying that this is some of the changes, and there's many that are left with everything related to generative AI. We talked about big data, and we think small data and model crafting can be a solution. We talked about the fact that those bias are present in those big models, and the bias will always be present all the time, but you just have to choose your bias. And then we talked about the potential for technological unemployment, the problem with synthetic media and deepfake, and the authenticity, the fact that we cannot tell apart. We're going to have to legislate ways by which we can trust the source. When you can't trust the content, you have to trust the source of the message. And so the anonymous internet is a little bit in peril there. And then the implication on the phenomenological dimensions of our life of all those systems are complicated, amongst other issues, environmental cost, etc. All right, so I'll stop here. I want to thank all the colleagues, team lab members, which are not all here, but they're all in our arts, without whom none of that would have been possible. If you fancy a French accent, I have 2 courses on Cadence where I go in depth into all of that. And for those who are interested, because you're grad students at SIAT, you can probably audit easily some of the AI courses that we have now bundled at the undergrad level in our AI macro certificate that is open to people outside of the university as well, but we welcome people from inside the university very much. And you can get some of those undergrad class cross-listed and get sometimes, with the graduate chair's permission, some credit for this. All right, so I'm gonna finish here just by thanking the funding bodies, NSERC, SHUC, and the Canada Council for the Arts that make this work possible. And thank you all for your attention, given how fast I talk with such a strong accent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Philippe. Okay, so we welcome any questions that you might have. I have this cute little microphone, and I ask that you speak into it. Okay? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Philip. You have a really good taste on your clothes, and I'm so inspired. I mean, impressed. Where do you get inspiration from for your fashion? AI?
Today is to divert everyone from the fears and dangers of AI using a pair of red socks. You see how far that can go. I don't know, I'm colorblind would be the best answer. Yeah,
Did not know
try
that.
that. Yeah.
Thank you. Questions? Yes.
Just talking to a lot of artists and musicians and producers, they have this concern that, you mentioned lowering the barrier to entry, and they have this concern that, maybe if someone isn't willing to put in the time and practice and trial and error to making music, maybe they shouldn't be making music in the this is not what I say, this is what I've just heard from the people who are producers, because I don't produce music yet, but or just, this concept of like creativity and like the whole work is in the process. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
So first, this is super legit, and I get, when I go present in art school, which I do, or music festivals, there's protest against my talk, which is interesting. And then people discover I fight for small data and model crafting and alternative approach that, would bypass a lot of the problem of big AI corporation, and they mitigate their speech. But 100%, your 2 concerns here are valid. The first concern, why automate the best part of human life, like creating artworks? Like, why not automate making the dishes and cleaning the floor, which we also do, but through machines. But why that? Well, that's the answer to the second question, is human creativity is fantastic. I started with the idea that I was interested in generative art, a practice by which artists make machines that make their art, right? Nothing new. No, it was not planned that the machine would become better than people we train to do that professionally. That was really a surprise. That was a surprise to everyone. Not my surprise, because I have little to do, but in fact, Canadian Geoffrey intern, when they started getting deep learning to work, everyone was like, oh my God, that's what we've been trying the whole time. Now it works, what are we gonna do? Yeah. And so this is, a debate that needs to be taken by society. I'm all for democratic debate before the deployment of technology, about the technology. Is it the world we live in right now? No. We're still in state nations that are more interested in fighting each other and competing. And in the sake of that competition, they're like, we can't slow down, we can't think about it, we can't stop. Otherwise, they will do it, they being the other human. So it's, which human are going to be first seems to be of strategic interest to everyone. Meanwhile, this is really a failure of humanistic thinking, as in human did not successfully address the question what humans are going to do for humans on Earth in general, live alone with those technologies. And so, the answer to the second question is that I was precisely interested in trying to model human creativities, understand how it works, which I don't think we did, but we did successfully make machines that are better than most humans at those specific creative tasks. Now, there's still plenty of creative space for humans to express themselves, and plenty, we teach that too, that not only machine don't do, but in theoretical computer science, we have results of stuff we can show machine won't do. At least not machine. Quantum computers is a different set of threats. But so there's also good news in that we are getting better at delimiting what we can, in fact, automate and what we won't be able to.
I have a question for you, Philippe. So you briefly mentioned environmental impact of AI.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could, first of all, speak a little bit more to the small data model and the sort of perhaps empowering idea that we don't have to use large scale cloud-based corporate servers, to do this work, or corporate companies. And then also, can you speak a little bit to this tension between like corporate amalgamation of power and resources and natural resources that maybe a small data approach might be some way to push back against?
Yeah, with pleasure. So yeah, absolutely. So with small data and model crafting, we get an alternative in which we empower artists and creators to reappropriate the production machine from A to Z. And the only thing we need with Autolium, at least right now, is the equivalent of a gamer machine. And there's a lot of teenagers in particular playing video games. So you need a GPU, so a graphic processor unit. On a CPU, it works, but it's extremely slow. So there is a barrier of entry there. And in that sense, we are interested in pushing that. And we show indeed that in terms of demand, it's very, very little. And before I answer the corporate part, I'll talk about the environment here because I don't have a view, honestly, and I think we should do more. It's awful, the impact of those data centers. But the truth is, I'm also a mathematician by training, and I know how to look at numbers. And the truth is, the real problem with the environment is only one number, which is the number of humans on Earth, right? No humans, probably no problem. And I'm not saying we should kill everyone, but the truth is 2025 numbers of the International Energy Agency show that, of course, in Canada, we're very guilty of that. 62% of our energy expenses are heating, cooling buildings and transportation, then appliance. And all of computers, the ones you have on you, your watch, your phone, the data centers, the internet infrastructure, and everything will be capped under 3 or 4%, which if you look at the time you spend on those screens, is nothing. And it's very unfortunate, but it is the case that if you drop your kids 5 minutes away at school using a car, this is the equivalent of spending a week on ChatGPT non-stop, right, in terms of expense. And so if you want to save the environment, you stay in your basement, you try to limit the heating and cooling, and you ChatGPT your way through. I'm joking, of course. It's not funny, though. It is not funny. And there's, interestingly, with AI and with computer science, which are all engineers, there's been a slew of solutions and improvement, therefore, of all sorts of energy things that are going to spill over, so that experts say that, in fact, AI, because they feel so guilty about it, is going to really help in terms of environment things. I don't buy necessarily that discourse. I still think it's a problem, and we see the impact it has on water consumptions and others. But here I'm going to transition to my answer to the corporate thing by saying that this is, again, all our fault, like everything else, at least as long as we believe we live in democratic countries. And there used to be a time in France where the internet was invented. It was called the Minitel, and it was free and nation run. And you would get an email at birth, and then you go to the postal office and you get a little computer, and you can interact with everyone in France, check the weather, and check what the cinema is playing, and etc. And it was public. It was a common. It was a computer, a digital common. Like the roads are common, and the postal system is common, and the electricity grid is less and less so common. And there was companies, including in California, so it's not just America, that were in a way collectivists, and Sun Microsystem were fighting for the idea that we're never going to give a computer to the users. They're not computer scientists. We'll give them a terminal. That's what's called a browser right now. And everything is in the cloud. Everything is on a server. And they wanted that the cities in America would equip themselves with computers. It'd be national, and everyone would be a user. But other companies who did end up winning were like, you need your own computer. Imagine having your own computer. Of course, you're going to go to sleep. That computer is not going to work. In fact, you're going to use 0.2% of your CPU. You do right now. You vastly underuse your computer. But they would rather sell a CPU to everyone than have a system that works. And so for the longest time, we saw this debunked of the idea of having commons, and then we let everyone deal with all their stuff on their personal computer, which led to a lot of drama. And in the 90s, there's all sort of studies showing that 75% of the users of Windows 95 did had violence incident with their computer, aka they were eating the computer, which is not a good news when you have violence of that kind. That's it. And then the laptop, the portable computer arrived, and then everything followed. And so I'll conclude this part here by saying that there is a group in Canada that is working for the return of the commons in the digital infrastructure. And with the rise of AI, that conversation has been reinvigorated quite a bit around the AI common. And if you're interested, we just released the Art AI Building a Common for AI in Digital Creation report, which is a pan-Canadian report in which we try to lobby the government and extend the services. We do believe in our case for creative practices that, like Compute Canada, provide compute for researchers and academics. We need to provide compute for artists, creators, and safe storage for communities all across Canada, indigenous or otherwise. And we believe, therefore, that this is the answer to the corporate takeover of those technology and this sort of run forward. Because if it was publicly managed, and there would be interdiction not to, it's very unsocialist, but it would be possible to legislate ahead of deployment, which would be beneficial to all. So that's how we see it. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, if we have no more questions, let's all thank Professor Pasquier for today's talk. Thank you so much.